I am being watched. Welcome everyone to Mailfuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Person of Interest, Season 2, Episode 12. It's called Prisoner's Dilemma. So we're getting super serialized now. At least these last couple episodes have felt like that, and the ending of this one feels like we're heading into another very serialized chapter. Because while Reese does get out of prison by the end of the episode, a lot of big things happen in those last 5 minutes. I mean, I was kind of like, as I was watching this episode, I was enjoying it, and I was enjoying like parts of the interrogations. Carter's interrogating not only Reese but the other two or three guys that were picked up as possible men in suits. But that takes up a lot of the runtime, and I was enjoying parts of it, particularly where Reese was effectively telling the truth about some of his past, just using different names, and it was like kind of emotional moments where Carter could tell he was actually opening up, and there was some truth in what he was saying, despite some of the details obviously being changed for the sake of the cover story. And I enjoyed interacting with Elias, the realization that Elias is in here already and wants to have a chat with him. That's super cool. And I was enjoying some of the comedy subplots, which I'll also get to, but it really is the last like 5 minutes of the episode that felt really exciting. It felt like it was solid stuff, but the last 5 minutes really kind of ramped up because Donnelly, of course, dies at the end of the episode, right? And while it is kind of a neat, so a neat and tidy conclusion to that, and in the sense that like it solves the problem, because by that point in the episode, not only does he know that Reese is the man in the suit, he's figured out that Carter's working with him and arrests both of them. A cynical part of me was like, well, he has to die now. Well, one of two things. Either he has to die or he has to become a new ally because he's convinced that what they're doing is good. And I didn't think he was going to stick around, so I was pretty sure he was going to die. However, the way the episode executes this like beat is so good that I can't be cynical about it at all, because first of all, it finally brings in Stanton back, right? Because she's the one who actually does the killing here, right? And they kind of remind you of her throughout the episode with the flashbacks. I will say the flashbacks with her in this one are like, I don't think they're quite as like mediocre as the ones she had last season, because if you remember correctly, in season 1 I was kind of critical of the few episodes that had flashbacks with her and Reese being a little bit lackluster, barring the final one, season 1, which was the like where he had to kill her and the drone at the end and all that. This was better than most of those other ones that I didn't like as much, but they still felt a bit scattershot. It felt like they wanted to remind us that she was around, and also reveal that there was a bit of a romantic relationship, although romantic maybe doesn't feel like quite the right word. They were engaged, seemingly, in a sexual relationship, but it kind of felt like she was trying to get rid of the good guy in Reese and sort of bring out the bad guy, and that kind of resulted in like a weird sexual relationship, seemingly from those flashbacks. So, but for the most part, it was about reminding us that she was around, so that like her reveal, her entrance at the end of the episode wasn't just completely out of nowhere. They don't take up too much time in the episode, but that's actually one of the reasons why they feel a little bit weird to me, is that some of them are so quick and so like, like we already get the first ones about killing someone and Reese feeling doubtful about the reasons, like why are we killing this person, and she's like, they're just orders, right? But then they kind of do it again, and like it kind of felt like some of them are so short that it just like one scene to get all these points across would have probably sufficed. But again, not a big deal. It's just some minor critiques to throw into it. But the reason why the last 5 minutes is so well executed, no pun intended, because there's literally an execution at play, is the way it builds up to the murder, right? So Finch is on his way because he's aware that something bad's happening, that Donnelly's done what he's done, and he's calling Fusco for help. But as he's walking down the street, the payphone next to him starts ringing, and he just ignores it and keeps moving. And then the next payphone starts ringing, and it's clear that I think what's so good about this moment, it's not just that the machine is using the means of communication that it has with Finch right now. It's that it's going out of its way to make sure he doesn't miss it. That, you know, the simple act of like following Finch with the phones, so until he finally picks up, when Finch realizes, wait, that's really for me, because it's saying, no, you can't ignore this, pick this up. That alone suggests that the machine understands context. It understands the context of the victim, or the person of interest in this case. It understands why this one's important to these other characters that are the center of this entire mission. It shows a sense of awareness beyond just getting numbers and churning them out. And I think that's important. So I like that from a science fiction point of view. Like, does that, what that suggests about how the machine's currently thinking and what it's capable of. But also, it's just a really cool moment, and the fact that you kind of get like what it's building to, I think, before he even sees it, where the number is Donnelly's, and Finch realizing that they're at the, like, you know, there's no option. He just calls Donnelly and tries to explain that he's the guy who works with with Reese. And it's unfortunately just too late, because then Stanton comes in with the truck, big car crash, she kills Donnelly, and seemingly knocks out Reese with a syringe at the end, and that's where the cliffhanger hits. So I thought the way this built up, the adrenaline of the phones, the realization, Finch just making a ditch effort to try and talk him into like listening to him, you know, not even necessarily change his mind on everything. Yeah, like that'll be a mission. You know, that would be something that they try and do next. The goal in the moment is just to get him to listen and understand that there's danger, to try and save him and the others in the car. But obviously it fails, and that's, you know, that's where we leave it. So I really liked the construction of that last few minutes was very, very good. Like, very good. So, I mean, the rest of the episode has got a lot of solid things in it as well, though. Like I said, I really love the Elias stuff. Elias being excited that he's working with John a little bit. Even addressing the idea that they shouldn't be seen together on camera because it'll look like he's working for Elias. Donnelly's even thought that in the past. I liked all those little details. I especially love, though, that Reese immediately clocks, was his name, Hirsch, right? We've not seen him in a while, so this is the big henchman dude for the guy in Washington. Because Donnelly's got these men, and they're looking for the man in the suit, and this makes its way up the chain to the guy in Washington, special counsel is credited as, Hirsch gets himself thrown in Rikers by just unloading a weapon in the middle of a street in New York. Which this moment on its own was actually very good, just because they were shooting in what looked like a real location, and the camera's spinning around him in a public place as he's firing a weapon into the air. I do wonder, though, like, what, I mean, I don't know how much of an investigation would go into this, because he's just doing it in front of police officers, but you do wonder if, like, someone at some point, as they're arresting, okay, we have to arrest him because he discharged a weapon, but should we be questioning why he was just aiming a weapon into the air and firing and doing nothing else? Like, what was the motive for it? Like, at any point did any detective question why? But anyway, he wanted out of Rikers. I don't know if it's plausible how quickly he ends up in Rikers based on the timeline here, but it works for the episode. Especially since it doesn't, like, have a big payoff yet. Like, this is just to sort of remind us, one, that he exists, and that special counsel exists, because it's been a little while in the season since we've seen them. I was commenting on that an episode or two ago. I was talking about how it'd been a while since we'd done some of this stuff. But it gives it a little bit of excitement, because when another callback to a previous episode, the neo-Nazi from episode 1 is in there and wants to beat up John. We see him a couple of times, and when he's actually beating up John with all of his cronies, Hirsch is, like, coming in to, like, kill him, to kill Reese. He's got a knife on him, and he's going to kill all of the suspected men in suits just so that they're all done and there's nothing that can trace back to anywhere. But it's actually Elias who, inadvertently, in a sense, I mean, it's not inadvertent in that he does want to, like, stop John getting beat up, but he doesn't necessarily realize that he's in danger. Or maybe he does, because to be fair, he did point out to Elias that Hirsch looked like someone, well, like himself. Like he says, I think he's like me. He recognizes that he's another player at the table, and there's someone here that they're not aware of. Which is notable, because this is the first time that Reese or Finch or anyone in Team Machine, if we're calling it that, actually, that's a good ring to it, actually, Team Machine. this is the first they've been aware of him, really, right? Because everything he's done up until now has been kind of separate. They're looking for the man in the suit, quote unquote, but they've not interacted with them directly yet. I don't remember. So this is the first time. So I do appreciate, one, that Reese immediately clocks him and says he's suspicious. He's someone that we have to be aware of. And Fusco is able to say, hey, I recognize that guy because he showed up at the station earlier in the season. So, yeah, I mean, I like those details. All these, like, serialized elements of the show that the show's been kind of, like, put on the back burner for a while, all kind of came rushing back in one episode, which is kind of wild to see. We wrapped up the Donnelly stuff, but we also started off, or brought back, the Hirsch stuff, the Stanton stuff, all of it going. And I think it's really interesting to get this rush of all this stuff at one time. It definitely made it feel like there was a lot of big parts moving around in this episode. And what's funny though is that I think I actually, if I was to compare it directly to last week's episode, I would say I like last week's episode more. Which is not to knock on this one, but I just think last week's felt kind of special, and it felt like it did such a good thing on its own. This one feels like it's almost got too many of the main plots going to be completely in love with it as a whole, right? It's maybe just I wouldn't say unfocused, that feels a bit unfair. I don't necessarily think that, but just not quite as yeah, maybe unfocused is the right term. But I don't want it to be as harsh as that sounds, because I think almost everything it's doing is solid, and it's got me excited for what's coming next. And some of the individual moments are very, very good. But last week was such like a great package that was all tied up in a neat bow. This one feels like there's a lot of different things going on, and it's almost like a shotgun blast in a way. But yeah, and I love the comedy subplot with, there's two comedy subplots, kind of, actually. The main one is Fusco, who's basically given a number on his own to go deal with, and he's complaining about it until he sees the photo and realizes he's a supermodel, and he's on board. And every so often we just cut to what he's doing, and he's getting maced by her, because she thinks he's suspicious. Then he's defending her life by getting into a gunfight like he's an action hero. And at the end, she kisses him goodbye and thanks him for everything he's done. It's a simple little subplot, but it's really funny, right? It's the perfect levity, because everything else in the episode is relatively so serious, and everything's like sort of, cutting edge. Reese is in trouble. Hirsch is closing in. Donnelly's fact checking absolutely everything he says, and Finch is like typing really fast to try and make all these backstories work together. So we cut to Fusco, and there's just this funny little plot of him rescuing a supermodel and winning her over by the end. It was the perfect little subplot for the episode. And the reason why I say there's kind of two is this is less of a subplot, I suppose, but more just like a thing that's set up, we're reminded of, and then it has a payoff at the end, which is that while everything else is in the episode is going on, Finch is actually got a plan B where he's just straight up going to do a prison break, and you see him like with blueprints in the background of one scene, and you see him sort of like question if he should do it or not when he's talking to Fusco. And at the end of the episode, and he doesn't know that Reese has already been let go because the other guy's been broken and is taking the fall for being the quote-unquote man in the suit. At least we think he is. Obviously, Donnelly's kind of figured out that Carter's working with Reese at this point, but Finch has got like a prisoner, like a warden's jacket on, and he's got like a grenade launcher, and he's like, I've got a plan, Carter, we're going to do a prison break. And Carter's like, it's okay, Finch, it's okay, Reese is out, everything's fine. And, it moves on from there. But, like, I'll be honest, seeing Finch with that jacket on, as if he's, like, it's like he's got such a thought-out plan where he's going to infiltrate and impersonate a prison guard. I love the attention to detail that they gave him that jacket for that, just the ending of that little, like, through line of a joke. Very much enjoyed it. So, that's great stuff. Yeah, it's as far as the bouncing around the various like people. Obviously, Hirsch kills one of the guys that could be the man in the suit, which is just further convincing Donnelly that like someone up high is really protecting the man in the suit, and he keeps You know, basically zoning in on Reese, even though Carter gives him a couple of convincing reasons while she's interrogating everyone to go with someone else. This is a very exciting episode for all the ongoing plots, and there's like a lot of fantastic moments in it. But it's not as like, in terms of like an episode as a chapter on its own that has a beginning, middle, and end, and has a compelling story running through it, I wouldn't say it's as strong as last week's. And maybe I wouldn't even be making this sort of comparison if it wasn't just for the fact that last week's episode was such a great little character episode for Finch. And this was very different in terms of everything it's doing. But lots of good stuff, for sure. I will say, to go back to the flashbacks for a second, they basically do like a sort of edited down montage of that episode I mentioned, which was the final Stanton episode of the flashbacks in season 1 with the mission to kill her, right? They sort of like replay various parts of that. They put in like a little new snippet in the middle of it where she has a little conversation with Reese after he's been given that order. But for the most part, everything before and after was just like some snippets of that previous episode. And I think that was one of the reasons why I kind of felt like the flashbacks were a little bit anemic this episode. It was like you gave us like maybe 25 seconds of new stuff in the middle of that part, and it didn't really feel like, I don't know if I felt like it added much to what the proceedings and what was going on necessarily. The other thing I suppose the flashbacks do sort of tie into, though, is that when Donnelly has arrested Carter and Reese, and Carter's basically saying that Reese is a good man and that they're helping people, because Donnelly says, "What was your price, Carter? What made you turn?" And she's like, "There was no price. I was helping a friend." And he gets very, it's like, "Oh, open your eyes, Carter. He's brainwashed you. He's a killer. He chose that life. He's nothing but a killer." And because so much of this show has been about the redemption of Reese, I do think, like the idea of him just having that staunch opinion and not wavering from it, it does almost make him a villain in the eyes of the audience. He's already kind of an antagonist because he's actively going against our main characters, right? Even though he's not quote unquote a bad guy. But I think that does make him a villain, not in the way that Elias is a villain or that anyone else is a villain, but a spiritual villain to the audience, because we're so invested in the redemption of Reese that having this guy just like judge him and say that he's irredeemable, that he cannot be anything but a killer. Like, obviously the flashbacks with Stanton, are kind of to show that he always had that dichotomy. He always had the side of him that didn't want to kill people. He was questioning it, and he was sort of lured into it and gave up his humanity, largely by Stanton, but also just by the system around him that have put him in this role. But Stanton clearly was the personable force that was actually with him, talking in his ear, telling him to be the killer, to like being a killer. And there is some thematic value in bringing that up, certainly, in the same episode where Donnelly is saying these things, and you've got Carter defending him, maybe not knowing exactly all the bad things that he has done in his past, because it's worth mentioning, of course, that in the interrogations, he talks about his first time in the military before 9/11. He isn't, he is the backstory, the cover story for his this fake personality didn't have him going back into the military, so he doesn't tell any stories about after that. So that's maybe still a period that someday Carter might learn about and maybe have to, understand like what he's making up for and why he's redeeming himself. But we also got him talking about how his current employer found him and gave him a purpose, right? But we've kind of danced that tune before. We've done that before, but it's always nice when that comes up, because the friendship with Finch and Reese is one of my favorite things in the show for sure. So yeah. But yeah, like I say, it's those last 5 minutes, how well constructed it is. Carter and Donnelly arguing about Reese from a character level and a thematic level. I will say I really appreciated that, they kind of set up the thematics of this episode for Carter in last week's episode. If you remember that scene last week where Finch didn't want her to cross any lines that she didn't, feel like she could, and she's like, "No, I've crossed that line a long time ago. I'm going in head first." And in this episode, I feel like they kind of paid that off, because she is so working with them and gets, caught by the end. Obviously, that's never going to make it to anyone else, and our cover's clean now again, I guess. But I do think that was a neat little setup last episode for some of the themes that we were going into in this week's episode. So that's also good. So yeah, like really solid episode. A lot of things going on. Maybe just a little bit too much, which maybe made some of it feel a little bit like it was running through things quickly. But I liked almost everything in the episode, so it's really hard to fault too much, and I'm excited going forward. So yeah, it advanced basically every plot in the show. So I mean, it's hard to be upset, and it gave us a funny subplot with Fusco. So. Good stuff, and I'm looking forward to seeing what we do next time, because I mean, again, this feels like it has to be a totally serialized episode next time because of the way the cliffhanger ended. Also, I'm appreciating they've done this a couple times now this season, but they had it previously on this season, and I kind of like that they stylize it by having it be the machine's kind of like database, like sort of going through the various clips and information. So you hear the dialogue from the previous episodes, but you're kind of seeing photographs or little clips in this like manner to... It makes it feel like instead of just showing you like a little montage like most shows do when they're doing a previously on, this felt like it was... like you were getting a report of some kind, which fits into just that overall aesthetic the show gives. And I just thought it was a neat touch. I thought it was a neat touch the first time they did it. I don't remember if I mentioned it the first time they did it, but I really appreciate it here. It helped get me in the mood at the start of the episode, you know? So, yeah, that's the episode. So I'll see you next week for Dead Reckoning, it's called. I won't read the description. I do that for X-Files because they're standalone episodes, but I don't want to do it for this because, you know, like, it's serialized. The cliffhanger Moreland set me up for the next episode. There's no need for anything else. But that'll do it. So thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it, and you can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. But that is me, so thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?